Hey, I'm Nathaniel Fawson. I'm a professional archaeologist, and this channel is devoted to the archaeology of North America, especially in the region that we call the Eastern Woodlands. Now, I've been thinking for a while about why I started this channel, and it has a lot to do with the fact that what most of my colleagues and I know about, most people outside of the university are never going to hear about. And to my mind, that's completely asinine. If archaeology is mostly just a bunch of academics talking to each other, then kind of what's the point? So I decided to do this kind of 101 series that's basically the YouTube version of some of the classes and labs that I've taught before without having to worry about, what's going to go on exams or grades or anything like that. So this first episode deals with chipstone tools, which is part of what we call lithic technology or just stone tools in general. The most famous versions of these are generally called arrowheads here in America, but there's a really broad range of styles and uses for lithic tools, not just killing animals and people. Chipstone is one of the most important subdisciplines in archaeology for several reasons. First, it's one of the few cultural practices that every human person has as part of their cultural heritage. If you're a human being, then your ancestors made and used chipstone tools at some point. Plenty of other animals do things like build homes and share food and so on, but making, cutting tools from stone is something that humans have been doing since before we were, completely human even. So second, chipstone artifacts are the most common artifact in the world, period. Our proto-human ancestors started making stone tools over 2 million years ago, and that means that for the vast majority of the human past, we were making stone tools from all kinds of materials. Most stone tools, most lithics, leave behind several pieces of waste material called debitage, and those are also artifacts in the process of the manufacture. Third, stone tools do not decay quickly. Artifacts made out of wood or bone or cloth or anything like that decay relatively fast. Stone preserves for millions of years, not hundreds or thousands of years, but millions of years. And archaeologists have been studying these artifacts since kind of the foundational beginnings of archaeology as a science, and we continue to work with lithics a lot today. It's going to be really difficult to talk about anything else with lithics if I don't start with how they're made, which is a process called knapping. And I've done a video before where I demonstrate this process, and the rest of this video will make a lot more sense if you go back and watch that one, so I'll leave a link to it in the description. The kinds of material that can be knapped are pretty diverse, but they're all stone types that have a lot of silica in them. Silica makes these stones break in a pattern called conchoidal fracture, which means that when you hit it, there's a cone of force that travels through the impact point onward until either the material, runs out, or the force dissipates into the material if it's not hit hard enough, struck with enough force. So most knapping is really about controlling the shape and the flare of that cone. When you hit the edge of the rock, the flake comes off as part of the cone space that was occupied by the rock, but then most of the cone is air, which is why not every flake is actually cone shaped. Again, if you go and check out the link to the knapping video, it'll make a whole lot more sense. But back to the materials. The most famous kinds are obsidian and flint, and these two are extremely different from each other. Obsidian is a volcanic glass, and it's formed when silica-rich rock like rhyolite is melted down, and then the bulk of the impurities are separated out, kind of like in a smelting process with getting copper out of copper ore, things like that. But this leaves the obsidian in a much more pure form. But because it's been melted and quickly cooled, the molecular structure of the obsidian is amorphous. It's not crystalline. It's also extremely homogeneous. It's it's pretty consistent throughout the lava flow. And this homogeneous and amorphous structure makes obsidian really easy to work with. Flint, on the other hand, is what's called a cryptocrystalline material, meaning that it's made of silica crystals that are too small to see without magnification. And that makes flint much more durable than obsidian, but it requires a lot more force to work with it. Flint is really just a very pure form of what's called chert, which is itself is basically like a kind of quartz. It grows in the voids in bedrock over really long periods of time, so it's much more heterogeneous than obsidian is. It especially forms in places like karst limestone, and because of that, there's a lot of because of the long time period that it takes for cherts and flints to form. There's a lot of opportunity for impurities to develop in the material. So finding good homogeneous nodules is really important. You also hear about jasper, which is just a jeweler's term for chert. Other forms of quartz and quartzite can also be used for knapping, although it's really difficult and unpredictable to use quartzes and quartzites since there tend to be impurities and imperfections in the crystalline structure. You'll also get dacites and rhyolites, which are related to obsidian but not quite as pure in terms of silica content or homogeneity. So there are several groups of chipstone tools that are worth mentioning. It's not all arrowheads. The first type is called the biface. So spear points, knives, digging hoes, drills, some kinds of wood cutting and woodworking tools like chisels. And there are a few other tools that fall into this category. Anything where the cutting edge is worked on both sides like you would a pocket knife is a biface. The second type has a cutting edge that's sharpened only from one side, like a kind of like a razor blade. And these are called unit faces. And you get an assortment of kind of scraping tools and things that fall into the uniface category. The third type is called a prismatic blade, and these are long, thin flakes that have a very high cutting edge surface relative to the volume of the object. So, per pound of rock, you get the most cutting utility out of it. Technically, these have to be at least 3 times as long as they are wide to be considered a prismatic blade. They're much sharper than bifaces or unifaces are. A prismatic blade is made on very pure materials like obsidian or high quality cherts or things. And when it's made on these kinds of materials, it can be sharper than surgical steel. So, like scalpels, it's sharper than those. And these are really well suited to being glued into wood or bone handles. And the advantage of that is that you can really easily remove and replace blades as they go dull. Incidentally, this is a much more common technology in Eurasia, Mesoamerica, places like that, than it is here in the eastern woodlands. We're pretty much a biface culture for most of the time we're here, in addition to flake tools, and that's the fourth group that I'm going to talk about. Once a piece of stone is knocked off the main piece of rock called a core, it can be used for a variety of cutting uses just as it is. All the flakes that get knocked off are already sharp. So while it's not the case that every flake in and of itself, like they're not all tools when we find them, but just about every flake that's the size of your fingernail or bigger can be used as one fairly easily. The flake is the most important concept in lithic analysis. Really, everything else revolves around the flaking of the stone itself. Like I already explained, this whole technological system is based on taking a piece of rock and knocking smaller parts off. And that first main rock is called the core. And if you're trying to make something like a knife or a spear point or something like that, the first thing you're going to do is knock off kind of a flattish, wide flake called a spall. Something kind of a little bit bigger than the palm of your hand. And then you're going to start knocking flakes off back and forth to thin the thing down. And then you'll do any kind of final shaping. In the end, you're left with whatever you've made when you get done. And a whole pile of flakes will be at your feet. And those flakes are the vast majority of what we find on most archaeological sites. And so because that's most of what we find, there's been a lot of work done to get as much information out of these discarded materials as we possibly can. So the anatomy of a flake becomes really important here. When a flake is knocked off, the surface that used to be on the inside of the core or the spall is called the ventral side. And then the surface that was on the outside is called the dorsal side. And if you look at the ventral side of the flake, there will be a small flat surface near the edge that is kind of surrounded by a thicker more bulbous area that thins out the closer you get to the opposite edge. And that flat space is the strike platform where the rock was hit. And the thickened area around it is called the bulb of percussion. All right, so here, pretty standard flake, white chert, nothing special. You can see this very consistent underbelly here. That would be the ventral side. And then here you've got the dorsal side that's got all the flake scars from previous use on it. You see the rippling. There's one there, there's one there. It's leading back toward this kind of thick protrusion in the ventral side. That's the bulb of percussion. And then this little guy right here, it's actually kind of a little black spot right next to it, but that spot right there is the strike platform. And that's really how you know that you're dealing with a piece of flakestone tool rather than just some rock. This can happen sometimes naturally. Deer hooves have been known to do this from time to time, but if you find 4, 5, 6 of these in one place, that's not likely to be an act of random chance or nature. That's human activity. And that's kind of how we distinguish between random rocks and actual artifacts. Here's another flake where it's really easy to see those force rings that are coming off on the ventral side of the flake. And just like if you were to drop a rock in a pond, you'd see the waves coming out of it. If you follow the waves back as they get smaller, you eventually get back to the strike platform, which is really this just very, very tiny surface right over here. Flakes are traditionally sorted into 3 broad categories: primary, secondary, and tertiary. And the exact line between these categories are they're not exact. There's a little bit of subjectivity that goes on with these, but they're based on what's going on the dorsal side of that flake. When someone goes to an outcrop or a river to get tool stone, so napping stone, the exterior has been chemically weathered by the environment for thousands of years at that point, and this produces an exterior surface that's called cortex, and it's usually described as being kind of like a rind, and it's usually chalky or sometimes it's kind of gritty. It's not very good for making tools, the cortex. So if the dorsal surface of the flake is mostly covered in cortex still, then it's a primary flake. If it's only partially covered in cortex, then it's a secondary flake. And if the cortex is completely removed and the flakes are very small, then it's a tertiary flake. So kind of the reason that we have these categories is saying, okay, primary is when people are on the very beginning stages of working this stone. Tertiary is when they're at the very end, maybe, doing some final shaping or whatever, and those flakes tend to be fairly small. So for me, if I'm getting a flake that doesn't have any cortex on it, but it's still fairly big, like something like that size, I'm still going to call that secondary because that's part of the process that's more intermediate. It's not towards the end of the manufacture stage. So if you're looking at a site and you're seeing a lot of cortex on the debitage, then it means that people were in the very earliest stages of tool making. And if you're on one that has very little cortex, then it means that most of the tool making was done somewhere else. And your site is where people were using or finishing up or retouching their tools. It also means that if you're on a site that isn't close to a stone source, but you've got, say, debitage from 2 different kinds of material, then you can make some inferences that the material that has the most cortex came from the source that was visited more recently than the material that has the least cortex, even if you're closer to the material that's got the least cortex. And this is one way that we can kind of reconstruct how people were moving across landscapes thousands of years ago. There's obviously a whole lot more to lithic analysis than what I've talked about here. So I'll get into some of the other methods and techniques in a future video. If there are any questions, you can leave those in the comments. And as always, thank you for watching.